is in 2026, all this federal money is over.
Right.
So in 2026 is where you really have to prepare this state in 25 and 26.
Right. Hi, this is Michael Graham. Welcome to the Airport Diner, the legendary home of our diner table economics conversations. We talk to the people who want to govern New Hampshire about the most important economic issues to you, courtesy of our friends at the Airport Diner and our sponsors at Americans for Prosperity of New Hampshire. Welcome to another episode of Diner Table Economics. I'm Michael Graham with New Hampshire Journal. A shout out to our friends at the Airport Diner and the Americans for Prosperity of New Hampshire who are making this possible. Today we're talking to Republican gubernatorial candidate Chuck Morse. Chuck, welcome to Diner Table Economics.
Well, thanks for having me. This
so
is
you're
great.
a small business owner, so you've done this thing of sitting at the kitchen table and looking at all the bills and stuff and trying to make them work, right?
Every day. Every day.
So for you, what do you think is the biggest economic challenge facing New Hampshire, the number one economic concern that our new governor should have?
Well, the number one concern right now is Washington and their policies. Obviously, they're driving up interest rates, they're driving up inflation.
Right.
We're seeing it here in New Hampshire.
And look, here's our service from Concord. Do you need cream or sugar?
Yeah. Cream and sugar.
Right down at the end.
Oh, excellent. Good deal. We're all set. So you think it's Washington then?
Well, I think Washington's the problem. I think the solution is having a president, Trump. I think that's important to the situation. Let's fix it.
So a specific economic issue, though, facing New Hampshire, do you think? What do you think is the number one concern?
Well, I think the economic issue comes with the fact that the specific issue is drugs. I think we have to shut the door and stop the drugs from coming into our state. Let's build a healthy workforce and a healthy economy.
Right. So you were in the state legislature, so you had to deal with the state budget and with revenue all the time. The outgoing governor is concerned that there is a recession possibly looming for the state. What should a governor, what should the state do if they are looking at a future where there's a revenue hit? What's the smart way to take care of the state's economy?
Yeah, I think it's sunshine. I really believe when I built budgets, we basically talked about everything and we made it available to everyone. I never mixed revenues with expenses.
What do you mean by that?
Well, I basically made the finance teams build the budget for what the people needed in the state of New Hampshire. Then we went and talked to the revenue people for what they were forecasting. I think that's an important way to do things. If at that point you're short revenue, obviously you'll have to start to cut things.
Right.
And I think that always worked for me. And I went through some tough time periods. 2011, we were $800 million in the hole.
So what did you do?
Well, we basically cut $800 million and we got rid of every new tax and fee that was put into the budgets from the recession period, which wasn't working for our state.
So what kind of stuff, if you're looking at what the state is doing and you were going to try to figure out how to find savings, where would you start looking?
Yeah, I think from the beginning, when you start to look at how budgets grow, I did that when I got there in 2010, 11 to fix it. I went backwards and started to look at how budgets grew during that time period and saw opportunities where some things just grew too fast. And that's where we'll start. We'll start right away looking at what's happened in the last 3-4 years and let's take a look at what's working and what's not working.
So when you're out campaigning, you're talking to people who actually own businesses, people who pay the bills. What do they tell you they're most worried about from the economy side here in New Hampshire? Is it housing? Is it rising costs? Is it taxes, regulations? What do you think is the most important or the highest concern?
Yeah, I think probably the highest concern last year was talking about illegal immigrants and drugs. I mean, by far everywhere I went, that's what they wanted to talk about.
Right.
This year, it's certainly sliding into the fact that they believe the economy's getting tight and people are concerned about all the inflation and the high interest rates. That's a big deal right now. I think it's slowing up our economy.
So at the state level, unfortunately, interest rates are set by the feds. Obviously, the big picture of inflation is a national issue as well. What can a governor do you think, that's the most important to have an impact on the economy?
Yeah. And understand, what I just did I did back in December. I endorsed President Trump because I believe the model needed to change.
Right.
And I did it on purpose because I think that's first and foremost what's going to change everything to do with the economy. And even you take something like oil, if we start sending more energy to the Northeast and we could ever get that gas line through New York, that's going to help our state drive down electric rates, which I don't think anything else can. We got to get more energy up here. But I think, under my being governor, it's certainly about continuing with these tax cuts. And that's one of the biggest challenges that Governor Sununu was talking about.
Right.
Interest and dividends tax. Everybody's been talking about the fact that we cut them. We're going to have to true that up in this next budget. And it's a significant number.
So is there room for more business tax cuts, or do you think that we're in the sweet spot where you're paying the bills and the taxes are low enough to keep keep businesses growing, or do you think they need to go lower?
I think I'll see that in January. I mean, to be honest with you, I think there's a couple of challenges coming forward. I mean, one is I do think our income coming into the state's going to slow up a little bit based on what's going on.
Right.
I do think we have an interest and dividends tax that has to true up. And one thing that I don't think people are paying attention to is in 2026, all this federal money is over.
Right.
So in 2026 is where you really have to prepare this state in 25 and 26.
Right.
That's what I would do. And I certainly think it's the way we're going to approach it with the legislature when we move forward.
And and that's interesting because you've been in the budget process. Kelly Ayotte's been a U.S. Senator, but the budget process, as you know, in D.C. is very different. Cindy Warmington sits on the Executive Council, so she's looked over your shoulder on some of the contracts. Then Mayor Craig ran a city budget, but a state budget is kind of a unique thing. What's an experience that you take with you if you became governor that would impact, having the budget work so that everybody's in the sweet spot as much as possible on revenue and spending?
Yeah, 2015. I think that's a prime example of my leadership, the speaker's leadership at the time, Speaker Hinch, God bless him. But we passed a budget that said, we're going to start the business tax cuts. We were the 47th worst in the nation at the time. And we phased them in, but as we phased them in, we said, let's take care of mental health, disabled children. Let's work on these issues. Governor Hassan vetoed that budget. We went around the state and united Republicans and Democrats, and we overrode that veto. I think that's what governors need to do. I think they need to show leadership like that. I did it.
Yeah, and the fact that you had to override a veto, to me that's very interesting about how politics works. Because after something gets passed, everybody takes credit for it. Oh, that was great, but we're all great. Of course, everyone forgets they were fighting about it, at the time. That's what I love about state politics. One of the questions that one of the folks at the Airport Diner asked us about is ask the candidates what they will do about housing. How can you help people in New Hampshire? And first of all, would you describe what you're seeing out there when it comes to the concern about housing, and then what do you think the solution is?
Yeah, and I think one of the issues with housing is something that we haven't talked about. We are very successful right now as a state, so people are moving into our state and taking up some of that housing, and a lot more people are working from home now, so we're seeing people moving up from other states that are actually working out of their houses to save taxes from the other states. So that part's great. As Senate President, I certainly started working with the fact that I believe we should start, I believe in local control. Let me be clear about that. But the towns that want to work with us and the cities that want to work with us, we got to come up with a way to work with them on infrastructure, whether that's water, which I've worked on for a long time, or working on things like paving. So as they want to build developments, let's work with them and see if we can create density and build bigger projects in our state. But I think we can do that right away. We started doing that with some of the federal money, and we started working with the local communities. We can be very successful there.
So kind of a carrot approach where if they're willing to allow the housing to be built with local control, the state will help cover some of the costs and help them out with that.
Yeah, I think the solution to housing is working with businesses, the communities, and the state. And let's create this model that we've been working on that basically says, you know, if you build so many units, we'll give you so much per unit.
Right.
But let's bring the water lines in.
Sure.
Let's bring the roads in. I think that's where the state should be participating, and we could just create. It's already working.
Right.
We're already doing it. You know, look at Peterborough and Jaffrey. You know, we brought a lot. We helped them with their water problem over there.
Right.
They brought a line to Millipore, you know, which has basically created, I believe, 500 new jobs.
Right.
So it's going to create a housing issue out there. But the state stepped in and helped with a little bit of the money.
Sure.
You know, and then the business stepped in and said, we're going to pay the bond. I mean, it was really a great opportunity, and we've done so many things like that. I think that's what a Morse administration would do.
Right. So what about the issue of education funding? Do you think that education spending is right-sized in the state? And what would you say to, say, a teacher who we talked to earlier who said the state isn't investing enough in education?
Well, several issues here, but let's start with what I have started to tackle. I believed in education funding, and I certainly passed legislation that started that. We've given almost 11,000 kids now opportunity between, you know, charter schools and EFAs. I think that's huge success. As governor, I'd want every kid to have that opportunity. They're not all going to take it, though.
Right.
The public school system in New Hampshire is very successful. I want to continue down that road.
Right.
If we're the third best in the nation, look at this, Michael. And what's important to look at is, you know, we spend $4,000 per child more than the national average. Right? But what you look at is teachers' pays aren't going up.
That's right.
You know, the amount of students in the last 20 years has gone down about 11%.
Right.
And the amount of administration's gone up over 50%.
Exactly.
There's something wrong with the model. And if I was a teacher, I'd be concerned too. And I think we can fix that. I think that just takes public debate.
Right.
And let's work on it. But I want to make sure that we go a step further, and every child in New Hampshire should have choice. It works.
Right.
And if you do that, we'll have a very strong public school system, and we'll create alternatives for those kids that can't be in the public school system.
So you mentioned earlier, we were talking about issues, you mentioned that, you know, transparency, shining sunlight helps. So on the side of education funding and concerns about taxation, we have this new bill that's just got signed into law that's going to require the school districts to reveal what they're spending on bureaucracy, on administrators versus teachers, the number of kids in the school, et cetera. Do you think that giving the taxpayers that information will be helpful?
I think any information that we give to taxpayers, people that are serving in office, is helpful.
Sure.
Because when you start to put that out there and then people start to ask questions, it's like the campaign trail. It is no different. You know, I've been a year and 2 months answering questions all day long, and when you do that, you're learning and they're learning.
Right.
And I think that's an important part of how New Hampshire's been successful.
Has the New Hampshire workforce and the needs of the workforce changed significantly since you entered the legislature to today? And does the state have a role in addressing that?
Well, I think the workforce is changing. I think, you know, you're basically seeing that a lot more people are working from home.
Right.
And, you know, that I think on the border, it's definitely changed, you know, the fact that we have a lot of people moving up that,
Sure.
you know, are avoiding taxation in another state, but they're working from their house. I think most businesses are dealing with that part of it in a way that they're working with their employees. And
Right.
God bless them. That's great that you can do it. But then there's a lot of businesses like mine where I physically have to be there, you know. I think what we're seeing as a challenge in this state, in our government, and in our workforce, you know, that's out there in the private side, is we need to find more people to get to New Hampshire. A lot of things we can do, though.
Right.
We're already doing it by creating a great economy.
Right.
You know, I've been traveling the North Country. One of their solutions, and this is what's great about New Hampshire, is let's work with the kids that are in the high schools. You know, we created
Right.
this relationship with community colleges
Right.
where they're getting credits. Let's take it a step further, because the challenge the North Country is telling me is the kids are going through the programs,
Right.
but they're not able to join the workforce because they're not 18 yet.
Right.
Let's work with the federal government to make sure that we can do things like
Sure.
that. And you know what? Maybe they'll make a decision to stay in this state because they love what they're doing.
Right. Is that a
So-
concern you have, that the economy is going to be impacted by young people getting a great education, getting a great start, and then leaving?
Well, I think if we create opportunities, that won't happen.
Okay.
I mean, obviously, you know, I remember my daughter's first search for college. You
Right.
know, it started halfway across the country, and then it reeled back pretty quick. But, you know, that happens, and you go through those cycles, and, you know, it's whatever's going to get you to where you want to be in life. So we have to present the opportunities from New Hampshire. We're the most livable state in the nation. I mean, I think we offer just about everything to everybody. Let's keep it that way.
Do you have a concern that the fight over the education funding that's currently in court, has been going on how many decades now? We should ask Andrew Valinsky about that. Is going to result in serious pressure for either a sales or income tax? And do you think that the culture of New Hampshire, there was a time where that unimaginable, but do you think the culture opposing that is still there, or do people still need to keep up that fight?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I'd never support a sales or income tax. It'd ruin the state of New Hampshire. It really would. It'd destroy our economy, and it'd destroy the whole concept. You know, we're going through the Supreme Court now with that
Right.
issue. That decision hasn't been made.
Right.
But I just don't see where it benefits New Hampshire to have that in the court system. The legislature's always been there trying to solve
Right.
these issues. We know the top 50 communities that don't have a tax base that can
Right.
raise the income. We should be looking at that. The last time I built a budget in New Hampshire, we sent over $500 million back to
Right.
the taxpayer. That's what we should be doing. We should be looking at models like that. So I think we can solve this problem working together. So we'll get it done.
One last specific budget thing. One of the things that Governor Sununu talks about is that over the past few years, the state has paid down the debt. For a long time, people that know it, but New Hampshire was one of the top 10 states when it came to the amount of state debt per capita in the country, and that's going down. Do you have a concern about the debt side? Does New Hampshire have, because the revenue streams are so relatively narrow compared to other states, are you worried that a recession could cause us to have to dip in, could have an impact on our debt?
No, and I think we ought to stay disciplined, because the fact is, we probably spend every budget $125 million in bonding.
Right.
We have to live within that. We talk to the treasurer about
Right.
that, and we don't leave that. Even though you're talking about a $500 million prison, we can't leave our model on
Right.
debt. I mean, that's an important part of how we've always functioned. I think really what happens in the budgeting phases in New Hampshire, it opens people's eyes to the amount of money coming in and what we need to spend on that we have to do. And that's the part that I think I've been good at working, not only with the public, but
Right.
with the senators and the House members. I mean,
Right.
talking about it and getting the job done. I've done it for so many years, whether I was president or finance chair.
Right.
I've done it.
The last question. So a business owner is thinking about locating their business in New Hampshire, and you're talking to them about what it's going to be like in New Hampshire in 2025. What would be your pitch to someone in a state that, we're comparatively expensive, energy costs are comparatively high, the challenges. Why should they come to New Hampshire? What would be your pitch if you were our state salesman to businesses coming to New Hampshire?
Yeah, we're one of the most livable states in the nation. We're pro-jobs, pro-growth, family-first agenda, and we just got voted the freest state in the nation. Their employees will love us. I mean, that's an important part of the model, and I think all these tax cuts that we've put in front of people shows that we care, and we want to drive an economy. I mean, we're raising more money, and we're cutting taxes. It's a model that works.
Chuck Morse, where are you on the right to work legislation? It's come close to passing a couple of times. You were in the legislature for that fight. If you were governor, would you support that? And what's your take on it?
No, absolutely. And basically, here's what I see. It's another sales tool for the state of New Hampshire. That's what it's all about. We want to attract businesses to our state. I think if we pass that legislation, we would. And I think it's an important piece.
So what would you say if someone said, well, that's you're not worker friendly. You're against, so I'm saying you're against the worker because you want to let people work without being in a union.
Look at what's happened in the state of New Hampshire under my leadership. Wages have gone up considerably in this state. I mean, businesses certainly are paying attention to their employees.
Right.
It's working in this state. Let's keep it going.
Morse, thanks so much for joining us here for Diner Table Economics. We appreciate your time.
Thank you.
And thank you for watching Diner Table Economics at NewHampshireJournal.com. Thanks to the Airport Diner, and again to our sponsors at Americans for Prosperity New Hampshire. I'm Michael Graham.